Glad you're all here tonight. We're very lucky to hear tonight from Sarah Howell, who is the director of Montana Women Vote. She will give us the lowdown on 3 ballot initiatives this year that we're facing. One's good, 2's bad. That's all you got to know. Vote for the Medicaid and vote against the other 2. So without any further ado, let me turn it over to Sarah.
Okay. Thank you. Well, thanks for having me tonight. Let me know if you guys can't hear me and I'll try and shout a little bit louder. I'm going to stand behind the table so I don't feel like I'm really shouting at you, Mary. Sorry if that feels informal, but this way I can lean. So I am here to talk tonight about 3 issues that we will see on the ballot. And 2 of them are legislative referenda, LR 126 and 127. They're both about voting rights and election law. And then the 3rd is Medicaid expansion. The most important thing to remember is that Medicaid expansion is the good initiative and the referenda are the bad ones. So it's a key part of remembering 1 good, 2 bad, which is which. I'm going to start with Medicaid expansion and just give a quick update over sort of what's happened in the last 18 months, where we are now, and what's ahead. And then I'll talk about the referenda and hopefully have lots of time for questions and discussion. And feel free to holler and interrupt if you have a question in the interim. So Medicaid expansion, as I'm sure you all know, we got in this position in sort of spring of 2012 when the Supreme Court said, yes, the ACA is in fact law of the land, but the feds can't compel states to expand their Medicaid programs. That has to be the state's choice. And Montana was in an interesting position, unlike, honestly, a lot of other states, in that our governor, then Schweitzer and then Bullock, both said, yes, we want to do this. We're going to put it in the ballot, in the budget. We're in favor of this. And the legislature said, no way. So we worked pretty hard in the 2013 session to pass Medicaid expansion. We came pretty darn close. We passed a couple bills out of the Senate, and everything was killed in the House. I think just for background, it's important to know that we had a majority of votes on a number of procedural measures in the House, blasts to get the bill out of committee. Couldn't get to 60 votes, but we got to 55 votes more than once. And so that's important to think about for what's ahead for the next year. After the session was over, we realized that the stakes are too high. We couldn't just wait for 2015, so we started sort of 2 parallel efforts to continue working on Medicaid expansion. One was a special session effort, and another was an initiative effort. We are still sort of actively working both of those efforts, and there's pros and cons to each one of those, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. The special session, I think that we are starting to see more and more interest and discussion from the governor's office and some key legislators in a special session. I think if we did have a special session, it would be post-primary, so June. And, there's obviously a great deal of work behind the scenes to get that, to get all the ducks in a row to move forward with that. In the meantime, we are pursuing an initiative. We have filed ballot language with the Secretary of State. We actually filed language 3 times in order to get both ballot language that was legally sufficient and would pass the legal test, and also decent language that would actually go on the ballot. We just closed the public comment period on that language, and so should have final ballot language from the AG's office really any day now. That's sort of step 1 in this qualifying phase. Once we get that final language, we're going to do a couple things. We're going to go out into the field with a poll and get a sense of what voters think about that language, what voters are thinking about Medicaid expansion, period, at this point in time, and where we stand. And we're also going to continue to talk to stakeholders, community groups, community leaders about the potential for an initiative. In a month from now, we should be able to know for sure we'll either be out gathering signatures or we will have said, we really need to do this in a special session. So that's basically the process for Medicaid expansion. Just to say a couple more things about the special session versus the initiative. One of the challenging things about going to the ballot with Medicaid expansion is that, we can't appropriate money through an initiative process. And part of expanding Medicaid is appropriating some state money, even in these early years where the federal government pays for most of the costs. There's still some implementation cost at the state level. So what we do at the ballot is we change the eligibility statute for Medicaid, and then we'll have to go into the session and pass a budget that appropriates that money. And that is a process that we've done before. We did it with Healthy Montana Kids. I'm sure some of you remember that back in the day. But it does mean that the effective date of Medicaid expansion would be July 2015, even if we pass it on the November ballot. So that is a full year and a half from now that people are still waiting without access to affordable medical care. It's a full year and a half of the 100% federal match for Medicaid, and we get 3 years of that, and then it starts to trickle down to 90%. And so a special session in June when we could pass something, have eligibility and appropriations done right then, get people on Medicaid, 3 months from now instead of 18 months from now, that is one major consideration in this decision. So I just want to put that out so you guys know some of what we're trying to grapple with when we're thinking about the road ahead. Should we decide to go to the ballot, obviously the first phase is signature gathering. We would be signature gathering, starting in early March and running through June, mid-June, when signatures are due. And that is certainly one point in time when we would be looking to all of you to engage both in the actual signature gathering effort. I know everybody likes to stand outside with a clipboard. And also in the earned media, the letters to the editor and the op-eds and the community dialogues and some of that early education and persuasion work. So come March, we'll be coming back around, asking if we can chat with you all again to let you know where we are, what's ahead for the next few months, and how it's possible for folks to plug in. So that's Medicaid expansion. Does anybody have any questions about that update? Yep.
I have a comment.
Introduce yourself, Rachel, please.
Oh, I'm Rachel Lopez, and I'm a licensed additions counselor and a licensed clinical social worker. I have to work with this issue every day, and one of the things that people may not really realize or understand is that window of people who are ineligible for Medicaid but make less than 200% of the poverty level, these people are not covered by anything, and that's what the Medicaid expansion was all about. And to give you an example, I have a grandmother who's raising 3 of her grandchildren who just qualified for spouse's benefits this year, and she gets $1,200 a month, and because it's unearned income, she's now ineligible for Medicaid and has no health care. So this is not something, I don't think people really understand how urgent this issue actually is, except for the people who work with it every day. I just wanted to put that in perspective.
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point. I mean, one of the reasons we're grappling with this eligibility time period is, like Rachel said, that there's a chunk of people, we think around 50,000 people in Montana who are not eligible for Medicaid right now. They make too much money. They're also not eligible for subsidies, which actually go down to 100% of federal poverty limit, but nonetheless, if you make below that, you're out of luck. There's a real coverage gap. And so people who are in that gap are out of luck. And in fact, in Montana, if you are an adult without kids who is not disabled and not pregnant, you're actually not eligible for Medicaid, period, even if you make $0 a year. There is no eligibility for you. And so there is a class of childless adults, non-disabled, non-pregnant childless adults who make less than 100% of the federal poverty limit, which is about $14,000 a year for an individual, who have no options. 14,000 is 138%. I'm wrong. 11,004 is 100%. Gotta get those figures straight. Yeah.
If somebody was, below the level where Medicaid expansion should have taken them in, can they claim they actually make more than that, and thereby getting the very, lowest level of assistance, or the greatest level of assistance during with the plan?
Yeah. So that's a good point, and we're getting a little into the weeds here, but the first year, that being this year, 2014, of the exchanges, basically you can go in and say, I am estimating that I'm going to make $12,000 this year, and therefore that puts me over the threshold where I am eligible for subsidies, and at that subsidized level, actually you can get a bronze level plan, so the cheapest level plan for no money, $0 a month. But that's only for 1 year. And at the end of the year, the government is going to ask you, well, how much did you make? What are you filing taxes for? If you don't make that much, you're not going to have to pay anything back, but you are going to have to get yourself off that insurance at the end of the year, or else you could be into a situation where you are eligible for repayment of premiums or other tricky things. So for some folks, and I'm not a navigator or an application counselor, I have no business telling anyone how to sign up on the exchange, but in theory, that is an option for some people. But again, it's a pretty backdoor duct tape and baling wire sort of fix. It's temporary, and what we really need to do, obviously, is expand Medicaid. Any other thoughts or questions on that?
Yeah. Sorry that I came in a little late. Can you talk about the political landscape for passing this?
Sure.
In terms of the legislature and then also the electorate polling or anything like that?
Just see who you are.
Emily Bentley, precinct committee woman.
Sure. So that's a great question. Here's what we know. We know that most Montanans support Medicaid as a program. Most Montanans rightly think that it is a state-administered program that's been around for a long time that provides pretty decent care in a very affordable way to poor people. And a majority of Montanans support that. And the tricky part is when you get into the question of expansion. Part of what is so tricky about it is that we have incredibly well-resourced and incredibly motivated opposition, namely in the form of Americans for Prosperity, which is a Koch brothers-funded organization that has already spent $500,000 in TV ads, thanking Danes for trying to destroy Obamacare. And it's February in Montana. So we know that in terms of an initiative landscape, one of the things that we're going to face is a whole lot of money, and a lot of it is going to be dark money that's going to come into the state. It's going to be primarily TV ads. It's going to be talking about Obamacare and socialism on the ballot and that sort of thing, and that is not insurmountable with a smart, well-resourced field campaign, but it is also not anything that makes any of us sleep well at night. Legislatively, I think that we are in a similar position in that I think that we have a majority of legislators who understand that Medicaid expansion is not just pretty crucial for poor people getting health insurance, but also in terms of the economic boost that it brings, and in particular the economic support for our healthcare infrastructure, rural hospitals, critical access care hospitals, the ability to hire doctors and nurses across the state. And so a lot of these legislators in rural districts or districts that have rural hospitals understand bottom line, they can expand Medicaid or they can see their hospital close in the next 3 years. But again, there is significant party line opposition to this sort of thing. We saw in 2013, particularly in the Senate Republican caucus was strongly opposed to any movement. We still passed a couple bills out of the Senate, so that's again the good news, but there were a lot of primary threats being made. There was a lot of threats of dark money campaigns, and I think we're starting to see that play out, at least in the rumblings that we're hearing in these early primary days right now. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
I wanted to just mention that it's important that these folks in human, I'm sorry, I'm Jeff Langen, Hawthorne 95. It's important that these folks in Human Rights Network are conducting a poll before exactly going ahead with this initiative to try and have a reasonable sense that it could pass, because we were so close in the last legislature to getting, a version of expanded Medicaid passed, that the worst thing that could happen is to put forward this initiative and have it lose, because then the legislature would be bolstered, the Republicans would be bolstered, and we'd be as far from passing even the kind of warped version of it as we possibly could. So, that information is, the process to go into is very careful to try and determine that in fact we can be successful.
Yep, that's true. Any initiative moving forward is going to be hard fought. It's going to be expensive, and we want to be sure that we're taking it on with the confidence that we can win, and also that it's the right thing, for winning Medicaid expansion and for the rest of what's on the ballot. So, Jeff brought up one good point too that I'll mention, and then we can move on to the other two referenda. There is one key difference between what we would pass at the ballot and what we would pass in the legislature, and that is that the initiative that we've submitted for the ballot is essentially pure Medicaid expansion. It expands the state-run Medicaid program. We think that the only thing that would pass the legislature, whether in a special session or in 2015, would be a compromise version. And there's a number of these that have passed around the country. There's what's called the Arkansas model, which is essentially premium assistance. It takes those federal Medicaid dollars and buys people onto private health insurance. That's the kind of compromise that most moderate legislators are interested in. None of us like that. Just to be clear, we think that state-run Medicaid is cheaper, it's more efficient, it's more affordable for people who are receiving the care, as well as for the state to administer the program. But we also know that the stakes are high, and we have a history in Montana of beginning with this sort of premium assistance privatized version and then moving to the state-run program. That's what we did with the Children's Health Insurance Plan program, rather. We started off for 3 years with a premium assistance model and then transitioned into a state-run model. So we think that the compromise is worth it, keeping in mind the long-term view that just passing a sort of premium assistance privatized compromise wouldn't be the end, that would be a 3-year plan. There would actually be a end date on it, and in those 3 years we would have to continue the effort to get that shifted over into Medicaid, the state-run Medicaid. Yep.
If the ballot initiative does pass, is there a chance that the legislature wouldn't appropriate the money, or how does that work?
There is a chance, and folks who remember the Healthy Montana Kids version of this, when we expanded children's health insurance, the legislature waited until the last day of session to appropriate that money, and kicked and fought and dragged their heels pretty much the whole way through. That being said, though, I think it's really hard for a legislature to look at a decisive electoral victory and say, no, actually, we don't care about the will of the voters. We're not going to do this. I think that, that is a potential outcome, but there would be serious consequences to that.
What are the serious consequences?
Well, my hope is that people lose their jobs.
Any guarantee that?
Of course not. But again, it's never happened before that the legislature has refused to appropriate after an initiative. Maybe I might be wrong about that with some of the mining cleanup stuff. Anyway, in my short memory of this stuff, that's never happened. So, it's what we have to work with. Okay, I'm going to start talking about the legislative referenda, so we have plenty of time to discuss those as well. So, another fun thing that happened in the 2013 session is that the legislature passed 2 legislative referenda, and what was particularly fun about this is that these passed out of the Senate amongst a really remarkable show on the part of Senate Democrats, in which the Democrats attempted to utilize a procedural move in which they could delay a vote so as the deadline for passing these would pass. The Republicans ignored that procedural vote and voted right over them, and people were banging their shoes on the desks and hollering from the balcony, and people were being threatened with arrest, and it was really a good time. But a bad result, which was that these 2 referenda passed. They are legislative referenda 126 and 127. 126 ends election day voter registration. So in 2005, we started election day voter registration, late and same day registration, which allows somebody to register and vote at the same time, anytime after the close of regular voter registration, right up until the end of election day. What 126 does is roll that deadline back to 5 p.m. on the Friday before Election Day. So we lose half of Saturday, all of Monday, and all of Tuesday for late and same day voter registration. And what's most terrible that we lose is that Election Day registration. Because Election Day registration is, amongst other things, a safeguard for people who think that they're registered for one reason or another and come to find out that they're not. Last year, or 2012 rather, we heard a lot of this. My coworker and I were down at the fairgrounds here in Missoula. I'm sure you all remember there were very long lines of people at the fairgrounds trying to register and vote. And we heard time and time again from people who said, my husband and I moved, we both went into the DMV to update our driver's licenses, we registered to vote at the same time through the motor voter. We went to vote at our polling place. He was on the polls and I was not. Right? We heard people who said, I didn't realize, I've moved twice, I didn't realize that I had to re-register. We heard people to say, I registered with somebody on the street, and now they're saying that I'm not registered anymore. So there's all sorts of issues that can happen. People can read your handwriting wrong, it can be a computer error, something can happen at the DMV, whatever. Election day registration is the process through which obviously you still get to register and vote. And it's pretty important. There has been, I'm sorry, I wish I had the exact number memorized, but I think something like 26,000 people have utilized election day registration since it was implemented in 2005. I could be wrong about that number, so don't quote me. Election day registration is particularly important for folks who are, vulnerable to disenfranchisement or often disenfranchised. So that's seniors, it's people with disabilities, it's veterans, it's people who live in rural communities, it's poor people. And, we really care about having a system that allows people as many opportunities to vote as possible. The second referenda, 127, changes our primary election system to what's called a top 2 primary. A top two primary, I'm sure many of you know this already. Right now we have party primaries, so when you go to vote on primary election day, you get a party ballot and you vote on that. Whoever wins your party primary goes on the general election ballot. So usually we have a Republican and a Democrat. Sometimes we have a Republican and a Democrat and a Libertarian or an Independent or a Constitution Party. Sometimes we have just a Republican and a Libertarian. I mean, sometimes we have, in some districts, as I'm sure again sometimes we have a different set of folks. Top two primary does away with the party primary system. Everybody votes for one of everyone who's running, and the top two vote winners go on the general election ballot. So that means that you could get, two Democrats, you could get two Republicans, top two people who get the most votes go onto the general ballot. This is a couple terrible things that this does. One, historically, it really lowers primary turnout. Washington State has a top two primary. They've done a study that shows that primary turnout has plummeted. And, from Montana Women Vote's perspective, that's really alarming. It seems like this is an electoral change that's just going to disenfranchise a ton of people who feel like they don't get a choice anymore. Secondly, it effectively does away with third parties in Montana. So, any third party candidate, their likelihood of making it onto the general election ballot falls off a cliff, except in, just a few very rare legislative districts where there are no Democrats. In addition, this is actually a very complicated law. It repeals a ton of electoral law that's existing on the books. And so it's likely to be tied up in court challenges for, a decade, and it's going to cost $3 million to the state. So that's what these two referenda are. Any questions before I talk about sort of where we are in the process here in Minnesota?
Whatever the number initiative that you were just talking about, the top two,
Yep.
Isn't that the one where they also eliminate party affiliations for the most part? You can put a preference, but you don't say, it's not Republican or Democrat or Green or Independent. As I read through, it was a while ago when I read through this.
For candidates, you mean?
For candidates, it's not in the presidential election. Then they do use the Republican Democrat, but if it's a state, election, then they don't use party affiliations unless the candidate chooses to put a preference. Is that?
Just say who.
My name's Paula Schroeder.
Thank you.
I don't actually, that's not my understanding of it, but I'd have to look into that to be sure and get back to you.
Well, one of those two, and I think it was the top two. I'm almost certain it was the top two. That it just pretty much wipes out the party affiliation. So you don't know who you're voting for.
Mm-hmm.
Now that could be a double-edged sword. It could be good or bad
Sure.
for third-party candidates or whatever. But
right.
for those people, most of us who don't have time to do all the research that we need to do, we rely on party affiliation a lot of times to cast our ballot. That's the problem.
Right.
I don't know.
Okay. Well, you had a question?
That was my question.
That was your question? So I would have to look back at that. I mean, even in our primary system now, obviously you can run under whatever party you want now, and we've certainly seen in the past when people have switched parties in primaries for various reasons. I don't know that it may well be true that you can run unaffiliated and not as an independent under this, but I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay.
So here's what's happened. A group of organizations has formed a ballot committee called Montanans for Free and Fair Elections. Montanans for Free and Fair Elections is running a joint campaign to fight both of these referenda together. There has also been a legal challenge filed by MEA MFT for both of them. We just received the results of the legal challenge on 126. 127 is still pending. And here's what happened with 126. The challenge was around the ballot language, which was pretty misleading in that it said this referenda will ensure compliance with the National Voter Registration Act by doing the following things, including rolling back election day registration, et cetera, et cetera. And the National Voter Registration Act has nothing to do with it. We are already, as a state, in compliance. That is completely misleading. And the court agreed. They agreed and said, yes, you got to change the ballot language, but we're not going to throw it off the ballot. It's actually a really interesting legal opinion. So the court ordered the AG to rewrite the ballot language, and he did so. And now it says this referenda changes I'm paraphrasing obviously, changes the cutoff for late registration to 5 p.m. before Election Day. And then it says something along the lines of, the National Voter Registration Act does not require this change to be made. Something like that. So it's a partial victory on our part. It's kind of confusing. In some ways, confusing is in our favor in this part. But what didn't happen is they didn't strike mention of the National Voter Registration Act, and they didn't throw it off the ballot, which is obviously what we were hoping for. The legal challenge against 127, like I said, is still pending. We should probably hear in the next week or so. We're still hopeful that we might get that one thrown off the ballot. It has a single subject problem. Initiatives are by law required to address one single subject. This actually does a number of different things. It changes a big, long chunk of law. So we're hoping that that might be struck from the ballot, but we're not entirely optimistic yet.
Was the procedure in the state legislature part of the court proceedings? Like, it was my understanding that it actually passed legally in the state legislature. Was that not true?
I'm sorry, I don't.
So the state legislature has to approve the ballot to be right. Has to approve it to be on the ballot.
Yes.
When everyone was banging their gavels and it was crazy, and they passed it anyways,
Yep.
despite the protest.
Yep.
Was that part of the court proceedings? It wasn't brought up.
It wasn't part of the challenge. The challenge was entirely on the content of the ballot statement.
I guess I asked because it seems like now there's this precedent for breaking the rules whenever you want to get your way. And so, is that ever going to come up? Is that the new normal?
It's above my pay grade. I agree that it's a terrible precedent, and I have no idea.
After the Desk County incident for the first couple hours, we thought there was foundation for a court case there. I don't know why that never went forward, but some folks with better legal minds than mine didn't see that it was a winning issue. The fact that they broke our own rules to pass it. And so that's a dead issue.
Yep.
Sarah, where did this, a change in the powers, where did this really come from? Is there national research as such that, were the Republicans simply hoping that lower turnout would provide more conservative voters to the polls? What's the point?
Well, I certainly can't speak to the motivation of the folks who passed this, but I will say that here in Montana, as you all know, we often win statewide elections by a fairly small margin, and often that margin is equal to or less than the number of votes that third-party candidates for those statewide offices get. See, for example, any number of statewide elections in the last 3 cycles. And so I think, and this is, you know, I'm saying this just as an individual, I suspect that part of the motivation is to shift how statewide officials are elected based on the absence of a third party. But you'll all have to draw your own conclusions on that. Yeah.
Well, as far as 126 goes, you mentioned that the people that are most vulnerable are the disabled, the elderly, and the poor.
Yeah.
I think it is no coincidence that those groups generally vote Democrat.
I agree. Yeah, and I think that, you know, I think that there's a national trend right now to make it harder to vote, period, and to suppress turnout. And that's, you know, that's part of a larger national strategy, certainly, that affects people who are unlikely or reluctant voters in the first place. Yeah.
That's what I was kind of going to ask. Were these ballot laws or?
That's a good question. I don't believe that the 126, the election day registration one is, but there's certainly been ALEC bills on top 2 primary. I'm not sure if this was taken from that or not. I mean, again,
You want to explain what ALEC is?
Oh, ALEC is the American Legislative Education Council, which is a national group made up of corporations that bring together conservative legislators to develop and disseminate model policies on all sorts of really terrible and draconian things.
Could you speak to the importance of Missoula in terms of the ballot initiatives? I mean, obviously, you know, in terms of
Yep.
the way the vote works,
Yep.
and the number of votes we have, how does Missoula play in all that?
Yeah. So Missoula is pretty crucial, and it's particularly crucial because, you know, 2014 is not a presidential election year. We often in Montana see turnout that is, you know, on average 10% lower in an off year than in a presidential year. And we think that a very large majority of that 10% are progressive voters, liberal or progressive voters. So, you know, one of the key parts of the campaign, particularly against 126 and 127, but also to pass Medicaid expansion should we go to the ballot, will be to energize base voters, to register and re-register new voters or you know, voters who have become inactive, and to do some pretty aggressive get out the vote work. And so I think Missoula is a really crucial community for that. I think that, you know, if we can shave 2% off the overall drop in turnoff, and if we can get those 2% of voters to vote all the way down the ballot to the very end where these referenda are, then we will have put a big dent in our votes to win number. So a couple things that we're thinking about doing, for example, you know, one of the things that we really like in years when we have a lot of issues on the ballot are registering people as absentee voters. Folks get their ballot, they have a little bit of time to think about it, they can read through it, do their research with their ballot in hand, and then we can go knock on their door twice a day until they have actually handed us their ballot or turned it in, and we see that it's been accepted. And so that, we'll be doing a push to register voters or re-register them as absentee voters, and we'll be doing a push in the last 3 weeks before the election to aggressively help folks make sure they get their ballot in. You know, similarly, we're going to be looking at, you know, a set of voters who we think are likely to agree with us on these issues, but less likely to vote in a year like 2014, so that includes young people, that includes single women, that includes American Indians, and we're going to be doing a pretty solid push in the late summer to do voter registration with those folks as well. So again, I think, you know, Missoula is always a really core community for that, along with some surrounding communities.
If there are no more questions, join me in thanking the